Awesome. Hello, everyone. Today is Tuesday, July 18th, 2023. This is a meeting of the SIG Network Policy API subgroup to SIG Network. This is a CNCF sponsored meeting, so please be kind to each other, use nice language, and follow all of their community guidelines. Thanks for coming today. We'll go ahead and dive into it. Let me share my screen with the agenda. Per usual, the agenda is pretty free-flowing today. Feel free to add stuff as we go or anything else. So before we get started, I see some new faces. Do we want to get some kind of just introductions and kind of why you're here? How are you interested in network policy? We'll start with Hunter Gregory. You don't have to either. You can say, I got nothing to say.
Thanks, Andrew. Yeah, really excited to be here. Yeah, this is my first time joining. So I'm from Microsoft. I've been working on Azure's Network Policy Manager for the past few years. Yeah, and I'm excited to get involved.
Awesome. No, that's really great, Hunter. We're excited to have representatives from various implementations. For the longest time, it's just kind of been Yang from VMware and Surya from Oven Kubernetes. So good to have more implementations on board. There's a lot to catch up if you look back to our agenda and look through some of those docs that might kind of help you, but we're focusing on the admin network policy effort right now. So cool. And then I might be saying it wrong. How do I say it,
Danian Hansen. Yes.
Perfect.
Thanks, Sandra. So yeah, I've been involved in Kubernetes and the CNCF ecosystem for quite some time, and just joining to see kind of what's been going on with network policy over the recent months. I've been an active contributor in Cilium, which of course uses network policies, their own network policies. So just trying to kind of see what the latest is going on with network policy within the Kubernetes community.
Awesome. Happy to have you. Again, we actually have an issue to track the implementation of admin network policy, which is kind of the API we've been focusing on lately in Cilium. So any help we can get there and pressure is awesome. We also want feedback from them. So that's kind of our goal. Okay, sweet. So first things first, there was an issue that came up in the last SIG network meeting around a couple of concerns with network policies. I don't know if there's really an action item for us in this group yet. I'm assigned to this, but Tim Hawken gave his thoughts. So I am kind of just waiting on a response from there to see if we can help out. Essentially, the audit and security team was unhappy with a lot of the design principles with existing network policy, some of which we've fixed in admin network policy. But it's definitely a good read as we kind of push towards hopefully designing a network policy V2. So I definitely advise everyone here to give it a quick review. It's kind of interesting. Awesome.
Andrew, quick question. Do you think we need to fix anything in ANP at this stage based on their audit report for NP?
I don't believe so. A lot of it had to do with the lack of it. Some of it at least had to do with the lack of explicit deny, which is obviously something we're providing in admin network policy. And then what was the other thing? It's actually been a week or two since I read it.
No worries. It's the first time I'm seeing it, so I can read it.
Yeah, I just wanted to highlight it here. From my first read, I didn't think there was anything immediately we needed to change for ANP, but I thought it was kind of interesting that this feedback was coming in. I'd say, all the way now that network policy is V1. It's funny that the feedback wasn't given before, but anyway, and they're testing all the way back on 1.2.4, so kind of an old Kubernetes version. Just something to think about. I didn't even know there was a Kubernetes security audit report. So that's, it's all good things. Cross-pollination is key. And I'm sure any policy objects we come up with, we should probably from now on try to get opinions of the Kubernetes security team, right? Like it's very relevant. So cool. Yeah, and if anyone's reading that and wants to comment, feel free to. The more voices, the better. Awesome. So the next thing I wanted to start kind of pushing forward were the NPAPs. Nadia, the past week, did a good job of adding some documentation to our repository. For folks who are new, we have a website for this working group, and it's just literally networkpolicyapi.sigs.k.io, and you can find our repo from there. When I say the word NPAP, it's essentially a shortened version of a Kubernetes enhancement proposal, specifically for the Network Policy API. We wanted to make it a little less cumbersome for folks to propose new features and kind of quicken the iteration cycle for our working group. And it's modeled closely after the Gateway API, who have GEPs. So we have some good documentation there, and both Surya and Nadia have opened NPAPs around ANP features. In the future, we hope to, for anyone here, if they have some cool new idea for a feature or want to own some new object that could be part of Network Policy API, please open an NPAP. So diving into it, the first one has been open for a while from Surya, and it's regarding adding support for egress traffic control to admin network policy. I don't know if we really need to talk about it too much, Surya. Could you give like a quick rundown, just like a TLDR for folks on the call about what this NPAP is regarding, Surya?
Yeah, I can be quick about it. So the first version of ANP is supporting only east-west traffic. What that means is we only support part-to-part overlay networking as of now. And the goal of this NPAP is to try to expand that to also support northbound. So if those of you who know network policies, this is the equivalent of the IP block offering that the network policy gives. So something similar to that. So that's the one part of the NPAP, and the second part is to see how we can smoothen the pod to host network pod communication, right? So or more like towards the node IPs, which crosses from the overlay to the underlay. So those are the two main items that I'm trying to address in this NPAP. And I did have a question for Andrew or maybe Nadia. I feel like the gateway policy folks put their NPAPs in the website. And I didn't see the same, like Nadia's was also like a documentation thing in the repo. And I was thinking it should be a part of the website somewhere, right? And I don't know where.
Yeah, they actually do have it as a part of a website. I just didn't add it yet because it's basically just shows the same information they have in this like GAP or NPAP folder. And you just need to update site to do that. So I wasn't sure if we want to do that straight away or if we just add it later if needed.
I say let's get these two very first baby NPAPs out of the way, and then we can look at adding to the website. But it's a good point, Surya. I'll try to make an issue for that after this meeting so that we don't lose track of it.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah, there is just one tiny thing that for every NPAP update after that, you also need to make sure you update the site sources because the NPAPs or GAPs are grouped by the status they have. And I've seen like quite some PRs that, will merge some GAP change and then the next follow-up will be, oh, I forgot to update the site page sources to also change that, right? So that's why I didn't add it here. So maybe we'll also need to add some, I don't know, reminder somewhere to make sure we don't forget to do it ourselves.
A 100%. I think we can even add like a note in a PR template for an NPAP that says, remember to update the website as well. But for now, I think it's all right. I would like to do that in the future, definitely. So back to your NPAP, Surya, I gave it another review. I know Dan's reviewed it. I feel like we're moving towards consensus. So the reason I really wanted to bring this up is to hear if anyone has issues with this NPAP, essentially, because we are moving towards a point where I would feel comfortable merging it. So this is kind of the last shout out to give it a review before next meeting. And if there's not any outstanding issues raised against it, we'll go ahead and get her merged. Sound good?
Yeah.
Just one quick
Awesome.
question. I think we wanted to update, we need to update the format for that NPAP now because it was created before I did the template and the docs for it.
Yep, you'd be proud of me, sir. Nadia, I added a comment to do that.
Oh, okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, what else on this one? I think the only other main thing I had was, and Nadia also had around this KEP, and maybe we can kind of chat about it here really quickly because we don't have anything else on the agenda, was if we were going to define traffic destined towards a node or a host network pod as kind of the same thing or not. I don't know if you had any thoughts, Surya.
I wanted to make it explicit because that's one of the mistakes we did in the previous network policy where we did not have rules for this and it's not well defined. So I think we even had like, I was actually angling towards making normal pod selectors select only CNI pods and then have a host selector that explicitly selects only host network pods and make the traffic signal using those selectors. But I'm open to.
Do you think it'll be
amendments.
difficult for implementations to distinguish between traffic destined for a host network pod versus a node? I mean, they're going to have the same IP most of the time, right?
Yeah, that's true. But I think, oh, I feel like we discussed this somewhere. Maybe Dan had a comment on my previous thing. I think Yang also had pointed this out. Should go back and check that.
Yeah, I think we've talked about that there is actually technically there is a way to distinguish host network pod traffic from the host traffic itself, but probably not too many network plugins can do that now. So that's, I guess, kind of what we ended up with.
The 86 one, yeah, the one that's
Yeah.
closed. Add
You-
user stories. Sorry, no, go ahead.
You can like have rules that are based on the C group of the of the socket, and so distinguish different host network pods and host pods or host processes based on that, but it's not really obvious. I mean, nobody does that.
Right. And I think that's okay as long as we have like explicit mechanisms that we can specify that some implementations might not be able to actually implement. So like, i.e. if we added a node selector or even a host network pod selector, I guess that would be all right because we could specify that this may be a feature that not all CNIs can implement. I'm not against that, but then we are going to need to go down the path of exploring, experimental fields, or adding like an experimental field, just like Gateway API does, right?
Yeah. And make it not mandatory for conformance. Like keep it.
Right.
See if we have at least one or two implementations, so implement it. And then if we don't see any, then we do not graduate it from experimental.
Supersede. Okay, cool. I'm glad you did the right thing. You linked 86 here for folks following along in the recording or here. There's a lot of good conversation in the previous PR. The reason we opened a new one is so that we could align more closely with our new NPAP format. So, okay. Nadia, do you have any opinions there? I know you were the one who basically my opinion is I'm all right with trying to do both. I think there is some use cases for doing so it makes sense.
Yeah, I think the definition of our API may be a bit different in these cases. So if we say that host network pods are like indistinguishable for us from the host network traffic, then first of all, it probably only makes sense to use node selectors and not host network pod selectors, because if you select a host network pod, you like allow or deny the whole node, right? And the host network pod is just a little part of that. So it may not be obvious that by selecting a host network pod, you can actually like drop the whole traffic from the node or something like that, right? And then also in that case, when you do select a node, let's say with the node selector, you also say it will affect all host network pods traffic hosted on that node, right? But then if in the future, let's say we want to distinguish these cases, maybe you will want to select only non-host network pods traffic from the node, right? With the node selector. So these are different things. You will be able to have host network pod selectors and the node selector. And then the definition of what node selector actually does will be different in these cases. So that's why I thought it's important to kind of define it somehow while we are here. So there are no like two ways, you know, to do the same thing. And then it's also quite obvious of what exactly will happen with the networking when you select something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So is that the second stage of the NPAP, or the goal needs to be more well defined around what a node selector is and what a host network pod selector is, or does that come inside the API design that I do in the next stage? Like, or should I edit this thing, or is it a next stage thing is what I'm understanding?
I mean, from the API point of view, like how we use node pod selectors, definitely next stage. But here I just found that part that says, I want to control traffic from nodes and or host network pods, right? And it's not obvious if you actually want this use case for host network pods specifically separately from the nodes, right? If we will not be able to actually do that, I thought that may be useful to define it here explicitly.
Yeah, I think maybe even just break, if we do want to try to segment, or even in the future segment between traffic destined for a node in the host network namespace, or traffic destined to a node, or sorry, in the host C group, the default C group, or traffic destined to a node in a container C group. Let's break this goal into two and say implement egress traffic control towards cluster nodes, and then have another one saying implement traffic control towards host network pods, and define them as explicitly separate things.
Okay, yeah, that makes it more clear. Okay, I understand now. We'll update it.
But I agree with you. Like the API design should definitely be next step. Yeah, let's try to stay high level, at least in the first iteration.
Okay, sounds good. I'll try to break this up into 2 points so that it's more clear.
Sweet, thank you. I had one other comment there, but we don't have to go over that now. Okay. Let me get back to here. So the next one is in regards to tenancy. Yang, I know you've had a lot of opinions on this one too. So I started reviewing this today. If you could also give it a review, I think we want to figure out kind of how this would work if we need to do something here, and what the consensus is in regards to having a better way to express tenancy than we do today in the admin network policy. So is there anything else you want to kind of give do you want to give a short TLDR, Nadia? I know we've talked about this a lot, so you don't have to keep it long.
Yeah, so first note, I know that docs usually say that we want to copy as much as possible to the NPAP itself, but I actually left a link to the doc that actually then made to discuss different options, and copied only like the one of them. The important part is I've outlined like 2 main problems with having tenancy defined as a peer of admin network policy. It's listed there, and that is basically the reason why I propose to define a new object, which
Cool.
will be, hopefully simpler to implement and simpler like to understand what exactly happens when you define this tendency. So yeah.
Sweet. Awesome. Thank you for opening that. I think it's important. And thanks for linking the existing discussion. And that doc she was talking about is in the issue for the NPAP, and it's one Dan wrote up a while ago. I really like this doc. So if folks are wanting to learn more about our discussion around tendency with AMP, this is a good place to start. Cool. And eventually, like, I think we should formalize, to kind of keep us honest in the community, like a sort of timeline for NPEPs. I don't, maybe that's a bad idea, but like, because I know Surya's has been open for a long time. Like, I think it'd be good for us to decide as a community within a span of like, you know, we can come up with what the span is, maybe in the span of like 4 meetings where we kind of poke people every time about it. And by the end of those 4 meetings, if we don't get feedback, like, it's going to move forward or stop, right?
If it can be helpful, I'm not necessarily directly speaking to what you're saying, but it's kind of related. In Gateway API, we have introduced the concept of a probationary period for GEPs, although it's only during the experimental phase. This is because GEPs that make it to experimental but then last for, say, 2 years become used in production and are no longer experimental, even though they say experimental. So we had at least one really bad situation where that happened, and learned from it. So it's not exactly the same as saying we just have a timer on all of our NPEPs or whatever, but definitely during the point where people are told to start using a thing, I would recommend some kind of probationary period. Upstream does something similar.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. We don't even have kind of like the infrastructure set up today for having experimental, you know, the different stages that GEPs do in the Gateway API, but it's probably something we're going to need. So Shane, one question for you from Gateway API. Do fields that maybe are not implementable by every implementation, do they ever make it out of experimental, or do they, what's the name for, okay.
Yeah, we call that extended, and we like that to be at least 3, I think. Okay. I think it's at least 3 implementations can do it. We'll call it extended and move it out of experimental.
And can extended apply to just fields within an object, or can they apply to a whole object as well?
It can even apply to just values within those fields. So like we have extended, we have like things where like it's a core field, but there's an extended option.
Okay. And do you annotate the actual API with that information, like if it's experimental or not, or is that done separately?
Experimental is different. So actually experimental has to do with our release channels, and you can have an experimental thing actually goes with our experimental manifests and may include things that are said to be extended, but aren't actually promoted to standard, if that makes sense. So that's a release channel. So like something that's extended will go into experimental first, and it'll only be available there. And once it's graduated, it's gone through all its testing, and we're sure that it's working with conformance with the implementations that can do it, then it'll start showing up in the standard channel later. But that's separate from being extended. Extended is like, what level of support do we say this is at? Like, do all implementations need to do this or not? And then experimental versus standard. It's confusing.
It's confusing, but I think it's important because it allows you as a working group to roll out like maybe some more exciting fields and features in an API without worrying about breaking everyone, right? And like that
people should,
that's what we've been trying to
not be using the experimental manifest in production. They do, and that's fine if they want to, but we say should not for a reason, and it's up to them if they want to do that.
Okay. I'm going to start looking into adding that infrastructure for us as well, because I think as we move into beta, the more NPEPs that are open, the more I realize we might have some fields or parts of our API that are a little more difficult to implement for a lot of folks. So
Yeah, and if it's helpful, I've recently made some updates to the GEP overview file. So under the GEP stir and gateway API, which includes, for instance, the probationary period. We give like a roughly, it says like we pick a probationary period, but we kind of just decided on like 6 months is kind of going to be the average, where like the idea is come up with your graduation criteria. Once you hit experimental, you have to have graduation criteria to make it to standard. And 6 months is the time period you have to meet that graduation criteria, or else you'll be considered pulled. So the idea here is, in the past, we've had people like just jump on experimental, use it in production, and unfortunately then it became real. So this makes it very clear that that's on them, not on us. Like if they decide to do that, and that we reserve the right and have communicated that we may need to pull the rug out from underneath a feature that can't meet its graduation criteria.
Awesome.
Hey, well,
I'll just,
we are here. I just
Yeah.
yeah, I just wanted to tell where you can find, like, we've added these instructions on how to open NPAP, right, and what statuses we have now. Not sure if it's easy to find. So one way is in the network policy API website there is a reference section that you need to click on, and there is enhancement proposals. So that's where you read that. And another way to find that place is now we have templates for issues in the repository we have. Then if you open enhancement proposal, there will also be a link to this process saying that you may need to follow it if the enhancement is big enough. Yeah, the /enhancement one. So that also should go to the same page we've just seen. Yeah, just in case anyone would like to actually find that.
I was looking for that earlier and I couldn't find it, so I'm glad you brought it up.
Yeah, me too.
But yeah, huge thanks to Nadia for help with all that. That's awesome. Sweet. Cool. Okay. Any other questions with the NPAP process? I think I have some stuff to look at to try to make this even better. But excited that we're getting it rolling. Sweet. Silence is affirmation in my book. Okay. Next thing, I'm going to toss it over to Yang and Surya, whatever order you want to go first. Doesn't have to be long, just really informal and brief for folks who haven't been here. Oven, Kubernetes, and Antria, I'd say, are kind of the furthest along with implementing admin network policy. So hopefully we'll have like actually complete implementation soon. So I'll toss it over to y'all. Surya, you want to go first?
Yeah, I can go first. So we have been working closely with the Upstream community for 6 months now, or even over there, since the Detroit KubeCon, which is when I first got involved with ANP. So I have this implementation in progress. So it's mostly us working with, so it's Red Hat and NVIDIA who use OVNK mostly, but it is open source and Upstream CNI plugin. And so we are in good shape right now, like with regards to supporting all the fields. There are some fields that we have not implemented yet. Some of them, so one of them is the same labels and not same labels. And the reason why we didn't implement it is because of the tenancy NPEP that Nadia has opened, because we wanted to clarify what that field stands for. And the other thing that is sort of not in the first iteration of implementation is the named ports. But I do have like a secondary PR where we will bring it in. So outside of these two, I think pretty much we implement all the other aspects of the API that we have in Vivan. And we are hoping to get this merged as soon as we can. And the nice thing about this is that if you open like one of this, you don't have to open the CI job right now, but we have defined the conformance tests in the network policy API repo. So all the E2E tests live in the Upstream repo, but every CNI can just take that and run it downstream in their specific implementation. And that is already done in this PR, which is pretty cool. So the CIs are all running the E2Es that are versioned with the 1.1 release that we have in all the lanes. So it's good that the conformance tests are more upstream generic and not CNI specific. But the next step here is to also do conformance profiles. So since OBNK is almost done and Andrea is also almost done, I do plan to open a conformance profile NPAP, the courtesy of Gateway API, because they did this first, so that we can then report which are the CNI plugins that are implementing a specific API upstream. So for ANP and BANP, we can say that, okay, OBNK does it, Andrea does it, and we can give some sort of a badge saying whether they're conformant to all the API fields or if they're conformant to some of them and not really for everything and stuff like that. So that's where we are at right now. So I hope to make a lot of progress in the next 2 months on the implementation and conformance profiles in general.
Sweet. Thanks so
We just
much.
we just moved conformance profiles into experimental in Gateway API, and we have our first live report coming in shortly. So just wanted to let you know that that's the state of those things. And I don't know if we're gonna have time before Gateway API GA, which we're hoping to do before Chicago, but I still think it would probably be good if we came together and like kind of made this a more generic library at some point in the next year. If you guys end up really liking it.
Yeah, I think that that is a great idea, Shane. Maybe more projects, as more projects become out of tree, this can be of essence, right? Like I see a lot of scope here. And I was even thinking that for the contributor summit, we should make it a bit more wider and maybe do a talk. I don't know.
Yeah.
Sweet. Thanks so much, Daria. That's an awesome update. Good to hear all the news. Yang, where are you getting with Andrea? Have you been able to run some of these conformance tests as well? Or?
Yeah, it's a little bit more complicated story. So for Andrea, I think the implementation is ready. We have this PR for the implementation, which, you know, obviously pretty much does the same thing. We don't support the same labels or not same labels yet, but I think we do actually support the name port case, which I didn't realize that there wasn't one in the conformance testing, which I can probably add to that. But I think we do support the name port case, so that's not a part of the conformance. Now, the problem we run into the conformance testing is that I've tested in the local setup with Andrea deployed and it passes everything. Now, the strategy for conformance testing on Andrea is that we were trying to add a GitHub action so that, you know, every time maybe a PR is pushed to the Andrea repo, we spin up a new client environment and do the conformance testing there. But we discovered that, you know, because maybe the test bed will be a little bit slow at there, the current conformance testing logic doesn't, there's a little bit of a glitch that we needed to fix. So it spins up 4 namespaces and, you know, use the pods in the 4 namespaces, the Harry Potter houses, right, to do the conformance testing. But the problem is right now we use a pod ready condition to verify that these pods are all ready. Now on the test bed we had after the stateful set is deployed, the pods are not even there. So in short, we got a wrong green light for commencing the conformance testing before all the testing pods are actually becoming ready. So this is something that I have already opened the PR to fix, and I'm thinking that we probably need this to be merged and then maybe use a different release tag or something so that, you know, Andrea can use that specific release tag to do the conformance testing, because otherwise the GitHub Actions is actually failing on the Andrea testbed. So
okay.
So this is kind of like the status right now, but, you know, I'm hoping to have this, you know, sorted out soon, because we're actually looking at maybe another Entra release next week, and I really hope to get the minimal policy support merged by that release. So, but obviously we need the conformance testing to be passing. So, I'll I see Surya has already commented on the PR. I will address these comments, and let's maybe get this merged by today or tomorrow, so that we can have more tests in Entra, see if all these are passes, and we should be good to go for merging the feature in Entra.
Yeah, this
Sweet.
is actually awesome. And I took a look at the PR, and it was coincidental because one of the lanes, when I was testing it in kind on OBNK, I ran into this exact same issue that you reported. I just didn't have time to dig into it. So I wanted to take a moment to thank you for coming and fixing this, right? Because it is going to help OBNK as well, because I did see
No
this.
worries. And I think I just saw your comment about the checks. And I do think that, to me at least, I think the ready replicas should do the trick, because the pod status, it doesn't also explicitly check for all the containers, right? So it just checks, the pod itself is in succeeded status, which I think should be equivalent to the ready replicas. However, the problem is, for this specific change, I haven't been able to test it because I was doing a replace for the network policy API to my own repo, but there are some sort of like weird dependency issues, so I wasn't able to run this using the specific branch that I have. So I'm going to still try that to verify that it does solve the problem before we actually merge it. But I do think this should be enough for checking the ready status, though.
I think.
No, sorry.
Yeah, I was about to say, if you say so, if you want to test it once and then leave a comment, then I'm okay to merge it as is, if we think that the ready replicas are good enough for us to start to go ahead with before we start running the actual tests. So if you give me a green signal that it works on your CI, then let's get this merged.
Okay, cool.
Sweet. And once it's merged, I'll probably see it, but if not, just ping me, and either we can cut a minor release, or like I did for kind of testing for Surya, I just pushed a tag without cutting a release because the API didn't change at all. It was just some of the conformance bits. We also want to think about, for our next release, how we're going to package these bits into the release. I know today you're just pulling from a tag in your vendoring for your downstream implementations, but maybe there's a way we want to do that differently. I'm not sure yet. So let's just try to think about it while you both are dealing with running them downstream.
Yeah, sounds good. So do you think for now, maybe after this PR merges, you can just retag the 1.1? Like
yeah.
Yeah, okay. That's good.
We retag the one more. Oh, okay, I thought it was going to be a 0.12 or something. So retag the 1.1. Yeah, that works for me too. Yeah.
We can, whatever y'all want to do.
Guess.
Yeah, I never
think
released
since you
it.
haven't really, yeah, so let's go with 1.1, right? Like, I don't think we really need to do a new tag just for this.
Okay, yeah,
I agree.
That works for me.
Sweet. Yay, open source. Yang fixing bugs that Surya found and didn't have time to fix. That's what we like to hear. Cool. Thanks for the updates, y'all. That was really great. Hopefully, these two implementations will give us the ability to do some really cool demos with the API. That's kind of our end goal here, and push other people to get implementations done. So we'll keep soldiering on ahead. Okay, the last thing I guess I wanted to mention when I was looking back at the last one, the last week's or our last meeting's agenda, is Dan Winship is officially an approver. So just keep that in mind. If you need something merged, he can do it as well. So excited about that. And I think that's all I had for today. Does anyone else have any questions, comments, concerns Floor is open. Okay, again, silence is affirmation. For new folks, I know that we went over a lot of stuff that involved a lot of prior art that we've already discussed. If you're looking for places to get involved and want to actually start getting your hands dirty, we have plenty of stuff to do. Just reach out to me or others in the Network Policy API Slack channel. We'd be happy to get you up to speed. One of the big ones is ownership of kind of a developer network policy or a network policy V2. So we've been looking for someone to own that. Nobody has raised their hand yet because it is going to be a challenging endeavor, but we're looking forward to providing that functionality. So,
hey, Andrew, on that topic, is there an issue in the repo that provides more context?
I don't know if there's an issue, but we have a working document and I will find that and link it in the agenda. How about that?
Great, thank you.
Sweet. Okay, well, hey, thanks for everyone's time today. That was a really productive meeting, and I will see you all in 2 weeks. Have a good one.
Thanks, bye.